On this episode of Audiobook Club, Cold War Berlin.
Berlin was different, the wall a gash down the centre of its face. Streets were broken in the middle by a no-man's land of barbed wire and searchlights. Schools were cut off from their playgrounds and warehouses from markets. The map of the war was burned forever onto what should have been reconstruction, and the city existed in a frozen parody of peace. The first thing Gwilym had noticed on arrival was how tiny the place was. Berlin was an island in the East German Sea, and only half of it was accessible. You bumped up against edges with surprising frequency. The second thing was colour. The western zone was almost garish. Consciously or otherwise, the inhabitants accented their business clothes with shocks of scarlet and azure. They talked loudly and professed forceful opinions, as if to make the point to the others behind the wall. By comparison, East Berlin was a muted city. Even if you could find bright colours, you might choose something quieter. It was part of the landscape that standing out was unwelcome. You knew you were observed, but that didn't mean it was wise to court attention.
Hello and welcome to Audiobook Club, the audiobook review and recommendation podcast that always practices impeccable tradecraft. Hello Matt, are you well?
I am. Lovely to hear Simon Russell-Beale at the beginning there.
Always
describing Berlin a year after the Berlin Wall went up. We remember it coming down, don't we, Steve?
Is it healthy to have a fascination with the whole of that period? You know, I do sort of find myself sort of going back because we grew up. We've talked about this before, haven't we? You know, growing up and our early memories and things. And it was just kind of a given when we were growing up in the 80s. The Berlin Wall was a thing, and it was just the most natural thing in the world because we'd grown up in it. But my goodness, you look back and then, you know, and I've been to Berlin a few times, and I'm sure you have as well, and sort of looking at the history of the wall, you know, its inception and its growing up, and also there's a museum. I don't know if you know this, called the DDR Museum. So this is basically everything, what life was like in East Germany and East Berlin, and all these amazing plans for a 21st century Berlin Wall, when they absolutely were so sure it would carry on, looking super in space age. But my goodness, what a strange time.
Yeah, and the other thing that was strange about our childhood, Steve, was the fact that we spent every day under the threat of mutual nuclear annihilation. You know, the two superpowers, which is not a word that I guess young people know. The superpowers were the USSR, the Soviet Union of...
Are we doing David Jason next week and doing Open All Hours? Yeah.
The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and the United States of America. And both sides had a big red button. I remember that episode of Tomorrow's World where they started the episode live on television at 8 o'clock. It was half an hour long. And it mapped out what would happen if the big red buttons were pressed. Unfortunately, the United Kingdom only lasted 12 minutes into the episode because we're a little closer to Russia, Moscow, and the USSR than the Americans. So yeah, we would have been annihilated within 12 minutes.
There is a bit of a trend on YouTube for kids to wind up their parents by playing them the YouTube videos of the official warning from the BBC. A mocked up official warning, and they think it's actually happening. They've edited it down to like regular news footage and everything, and it's just showing their reactions. It's the worst prank you can play on someone who grew up during that period, because you're going to believe it.
Well, it's triggering, I believe the young people say. Now, the reason we're talking about this, of course, is our book this week, which is a new novel in John le Carré's Smiley series, written, because John le Carré passed away in 2020, by his son Nick Harkaway. I have feelings. How did you feel when we worked out that this is what we were going to do? Have you read a le Carré before?
I've never read Le Carré before, and much like everything else that I should have read, I came at it through the television. And so my first experience of Le Carré was pretty much the same as everyone probably about 20 years younger than me, was through The Night Manager with Tom Hiddleston. Before that, John le Carré was a book that you had on the shelf that was owned by your dad. And that was basically it. And you knew about Alec Guinness in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and Smiley's People. And that was kind of it. But when the Night Manager was so blow away amazing that actually I went back to, because the BBC then put Tinker Tailor back on the iPlayer from the 80s with Alec Guinness in it and the amazing cast in that. And I started watching that. And it was tough going. So actually when I heard that I'm fascinated by this book because it's the world of le Carré, but the first book not by John le Carré but by his son, and also it's narrated by Simon Russell-Beale as well, who I've always wanted. I've never heard him narrate a book before, but he's got the perfect voice to do it. So that's why I was keen to listen to this one. And of course, the return of George Smiley, the most famous protagonist, I'd warrant from John le Carré.
Yes. I have to say, my emotions were a little bit more visceral than that, in that, John le Carré was an author who had books on my parents' bookcase, alongside sort of Frederick Forsyth, Geoffrey Archer, Dick Francis, Robert Ludlum, and we did some Len Dayton recently. But the thing is with le Carré, well, for a start, once you do the tiniest bit of digging, you realise it's a pen name, but it's also quite a pretentious pen name. And I think I'd always been slightly frightened of John le Carré books. I thought they would be too hard. And I think the opening 2 chapters...
I tell you, this is the most
5-minute warning.
I was going to say this is the most appropriate night to be recording this. So, dear listener, we're recording this on Halloween, which of course is basically the starting gun, pardon the pun, for people to start setting off fireworks. And so the explosions you can hear behind us is quite reminiscent and not out of place for the subject matter of the book. It's atmospheric, isn't it? It's deliberate.
Yeah,
it's deliberate. Thanks for the fireworks, dude.
So we're going to do this in our usual way. So I was a little daunted by reading a John le Carré book. The first couple of chapters didn't let me down. I found them a little impenetrable, but we're going to go and do this in our usual way, which is a 3-stage process, starting with the author. But in this case, there are 2 authors. So John le Carré himself, who founded the series, who wrote the canon, and then his son Nick Harkaway, who's a novelist in his own right, who wrote this particular book. We're then going to go and look at the text of the book itself, and then we are going to decide if the audiobook version brings anything to the party. So let's start off with John le Carré, David John Moore Cornwall, born 19th of October 1931, passed away on the 12th of December 2020, which I realise now is during the first year of COVID. That may come up in our conversation later. He was better known by his pen name, John le Carré. He was an author best known for his Smiley series of books, and many of which were successfully adapted to television. In the 1960s, he worked both for the security service, MI5, for the people who are concerned with security inside the UK.
You said too much.
And the Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, who the ones that James Bond worked for. So other books he's written include Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, Smiley's People, and The Honourable Schoolboy. That's the Smiley trilogy, where Smiley's in charge. And these books are well loved by the people who love them. And that is why author number 2, Nick Harkaway, Nicholas Cornwall, who was born about 2.5 years before me, 26th of November 1972, British novelist and commentator, author of the novels The Gone Away World, Angel Maker, Tiger Man, and Gnoan. I have to find out how to pronounce that. And a non-fiction thing called The Blind Giant, being human in a digital world. It's fair to say, Steve, and I love your take on this, there's an author's note at the beginning that explains why he's done what he's done with his father's crown jewels and how he feels about it. What did you feel when you listened to that author's note?
I found it really, not to sound patronising, but I found it endearing. He really kind of talks about, he actually sort of took the elephant in the room, for want of a better phrase, and he basically he took it head on and just said, look, you may be thinking, what on earth is this upstart doing, writing more of his father's work? I suggest he's probably the best person to do it. He's an accomplished author in his own right. He would have ate and drank this world since he was a kid, and who better, to be honest, to carry it on. And I think this is actually based on a manuscript or some notes from le Carré anyway. Am I wrong in that?
I have tried to research it. He has put the flesh on the bones. It certainly sits in a lodge. There's a 10-year gap between two of the books, which we'll come on to later in the original Smiley series. And it depending which interview you read or which review you read, he's basically put the flesh on the bones of an original idea. And again, he states during the author's note, which I'm going to play you in just a second, that he grew up, funnily enough, listening on cassette to audiobooks of his father's work. I think the idea is that I think the way you put it last time was he got his revenge in early.
Yes, it's a phrase that's been coming up fairly frequently recently. Pretaliation.
There it is.
Yes, this is it. So this is where you get your revenge in before the salvo's been fired in your direction, basically. So that's what it felt like a little bit. And to be honest, it is very effective. I think it works.
There will be people who love the book, whatever it is, because their attachment to George Smiley and the circus is so deep that any slight touch of his hand is enough to bring them joy. There will be others who, for the exact same reason, cannot conceive of reading it, and whose hackles rise at the mention of my absurd hubris. To those people who will inevitably be given the book by well-meaning family members, and who will have to pretend to be grateful through an instinctive snarl, I can only apologise. I hope that, perhaps in your bath after a particularly dismal day, you pick up the neglected volume on the basis that things can't possibly get any worse, and find that the appetite arrives in the eating.
What a lovely analogy. The appetite arrives in the eating, and I think that's the only way it can happen. This isn't probably the first time that someone has taken, well, it's definitely not the first time that a new person has taken on a well-loved series by one extremely well-established and world-famous author. Obviously, Bond is an obvious example, of course. He's been taken on by several people now, hasn't he?
Yes, and in fact, le Carré said, who, as we've already discovered, worked for the security service and MI6 in the 1960s. He actually wrote the Smiley character partly as an antidote to James Bond. And again, I do say I did find it daunting. I think James Bond is the quick crossword on the back, which I can of the paper, which I can sometimes have an attempt at. But I've always seen the le Carré books as a bit more daunting. So they're kind of the cryptic crossword. I just have to stare blankly at them.
Yeah, I'd go along with that.
But I think that introduction is clearly an indication of not only his emotional attachment to the material, but also his respect for all the people who've read his father's books or watched the film adaptations of his father's work. And he's taking it seriously. If we move on to the book itself, it's set in the universe of John le Carré's iconic spy, George Smiley. The circus, which you've heard referred to a couple of times already, is basically MI6. It's the overseas intelligence agency headed by the other main character, heavy smoking, cardigan wearing, the man known only as Control, who's
I did wonder where. Sorry to interrupt, Matt. I did wonder. I'm a massive Fry and Laurie fan, and of course they did that series back in the 80s, a bit of Fry and Laurie, and they had these recurring characters, which is where Hugh Laurie referred to Stephen Fry as Control, and now I know where it came from. End of side note. Yeah.
So this book, set in 1963, which is a year after the Berlin Wall went up, the decade between The Spy Who Came In From the Cold and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, both of which are very popular books that have been converted into movies. The book opens with a character new to us all. Her name is Susanna, and she arrives for work at the office of a publishing company in London, or a minor publishing company, one-man job, apparently. A one-man outfit in London, to find that her boss is missing and that there is an East European assassin who says, "I'm here to kill your boss." Rather than running away screaming like you or I would, Steve, she goes and engages the Secret Service by a roundabout route. And George Smiley is brought back from retirement for just one last job. They always say that, don't they? And there's sort of all sorts of Cold War spy stuff across Europe, and across European cities, including Berlin, Vienna, and Budapest. Lots of dead drops and tradecraft, as we mentioned earlier, all stuff that you and I grew up with. The idea that people put a piece of chalk on a bench to say that they've left a message somewhere, or a package. And yeah, this whole thing of tradecraft came back to us.
It did. I remember a line in there saying it was a conversation where one person was saying to the other, "The snails have gone back into their shells," and we all know what that means, don't we? Answer on a postcard. Give us a call.
Yeah, the red cow flies over the telephone box tonight. And here's a bit where, and again, this is part of the intangible thing. The whole thing, it's harder than a James Bond book. This is the bit where I think they're in Vienna and George Smiley realizes their cover has been blown.
His eye fell on 3 men idling on the far side of the road, then moved away. A car went past, and another in the opposite direction. Nothing was wrong, and yet something was. Slowly he turned to Lake and shook his hand as if they were concluding a deal, and Lake, bewildered, returned the gesture. Smiley looked over his shoulder along the street. "We're blown," he told Lake. "They're here. Walk with me." Lake turned, and they strolled north together, chatting and gesticulating amiably like 2 friends in the sunshine. "I can't see them," Lake said. "Nor can I," Smiley agreed, and Lake immediately nodded. If Smiley said they were blown, then as far as he was concerned, that was all. The flight of birds, the Sarrett team had said. Tea leaves. Whatever he does, get your head around it because it works. When he knows, and he knows Vienna.
Yeah, I think that's just an example of, this George Smiley bloke is much smarter than everyone around him, and he's much smarter than you are. So don't argue. There wasn't exactly a White Lotus tearing through the Sardinian hillsides and then jumping off a pier and turning into a submarine there. As far as I could work out, they didn't see anything.
All he had to say was the words, "We're blown." And imagine that coming from Alec Guinness, I mean, cool. If you get told you're blown, you stay blown, I'd love to be in a bleak London street, which is not difficult. I'd love to be in a bleak London street, given the current climate as well, globally, geopolitically, and just turn to you as we're walking back down from the station, just go, "We're blown." And then we have to walk jovially along the street, so we're not sort of raising suspicion that we have been blown. They cannot know that we've been blown. So important.
But and again, this is why this is a period piece. It's really weird to think that 35 years ago, in a country that's only a couple of hours' flight from where we are. It was divided into two, and the east half was so different to the west half. The west half was a successful democracy, relatively liberal, and then the east side of it, people. The Stasi, as pointed out in this book, the secret police force in East Germany basically let everybody believe that they had a set of ears in every household and every office, and people felt they were being watched. The sky is the same as it is here. The buildings are concrete. It rains quite a lot of the year, and it's so weird to think that things were so difficult. I got to go to East Germany for the first time in 1992. And there was only one type of car on the road, the Trabant, which was made of cotton. Where we drove over from West Germany, where the grass was green and the houses were nice and everyone had a BMW and a Mercedes. And you just drove over the border to basically what looked like a brown wasteland. And the only fuel they had was called brown coal. And the East German authorities didn't necessarily worry too much about clean air for its citizens. So there was just this permanent haze and smell in the sky. But really weirdly, it was just a totally different way of life. You had to think about how you were behaving at all times. It was, it's really weird that this has changed in our lifetime. 1989, the symbolic David Hasselhoff knocked down the Berlin Wall, and things started opening up and there was the unification of Germany.
We should point out he didn't have kits with him at the time.
No, that's unfortunate. He jumped over it. But so this is really interesting. It's a period piece, as I say. In the opening bit, Harkaway goes in the author's note. He's worried about whether this is relevant for a modern era, and he pulls out reacting with compassion. I don't know if there was anything that I felt was particularly aimed at modernizing the novel that grabbed me. What about you, Steve?
No, I don't think so. All I know is that I can't help thinking that this got released at the time it did, because we've had this. I told you I went and gone to see Dr. Strangelove on in the West End at the moment. It just feels like history is repeating itself again, because this period in time, the remake of Strangelove for the stage as well, just seems so relevant now. It's just all coming back. We're all gone full circle. Will there be another wall somewhere? I don't know.
Either that, or the powers that be have realised that the people who had the traumatised childhood under the threat of global thermonuclear war, they can now afford to go to the theatre and buy hardback books. Maybe that's all it is.
Yeah, that's probably it. We'll cling to that, shall we?
There is a nod to modernity and diversity. So obviously all of the characters in the Smiley books, the original series, are white and male. And there is a little nod to diversity, which I think is relevant, which there's a department that solves special problems, that is a source of special information. If you've got a particularly knotty problem, you have to leave the headquarters of the circus and cross the road to visit the Bad Aunts. And the Bad Aunts are a diverse collection of women who come from different backgrounds, and their different backgrounds help to solve problems and look at things in different ways. I've got a lovely clip of Simon Russell-Beale reading Nick Harkaway's description of the Bad Aunts, which for me, I just want to bathe in it for a minute and a half, but it also will allow us to go to the bit of the bit of the pod where we talk about, does the audiobook make a difference? Does it add anything? Does it bring anything to the party?
But for something which superficially made no sense, when the fog of espionage covered the field and the enemy could be identified only by his footsteps, she had the bad aunts. Drawn from every region and class of the fallen empire which would hear her call, the aunts were a brain trust dedicated to answering questions which would stump more conventional analysis. Smiley knew both of the women Connie had brought in for this emergency. Katrin, a tiny bird-bone survivor of Middle Europa's hideous mid-century, whose age, unlike Connie's, seemed inversely proportional to her vigour, and Jessica, who had travelled with her parents not on the Empire Windrush, but a year earlier on the SS Ormond, whose long fingers, with their curved upturned tips, always made Smiley think of piano, who loved crosswords and wooden puzzles and picked up languages the way others do postcards. Patterned on the eclectic muddle of human curiosity which had 20 years earlier broken the Enigma code, the bad aunts were speculative, wayward, and uncomfortable, and capable on the right day of delivering forecasts of deeper futures than anyone had any right to ask. That was what mattered, Connie said, and if getting to that point meant bringing in people who couldn't be properly cleared because they were too Jewish or too Jamaican or too intimate with other women, then she would have her section on the far side of the road, and the lords and ladies of Control's court could tiptoe through the midden in their cork-heeled shoes and ask at her door for the truths they needed.
How's about that?
I've got a little piece of information for you, actually. And Simon Russell-Beale, by the way, amazing. But the SS Ormond is actually a book I'm actually doing an audiobook narration for.
What?
Didn't know that. Yeah. No, but basically, no,
Couldn't they afford Simon Russell-Beale?
When I explain the circumstances, you'll understand. No, this is I have a relative in Australia who's a historian, and he wrote a book about the SS Ormond. And I offered because I thought, well, I'm extremely cheap, i.e. free. Do you want me to narrate a few chapters, see if you like it? And then he said it's just for the family, though. So, it's not going to be commercially available. Just thought I'd stick that. I don't know why I just stuck that in there, to be honest.
No, well, you're just showing off, aren't you?
I'm just humble bragging. Not even humble bragging. There's nothing to show. I haven't done it yet.
Simon Russell-Beale is your narrator. Sir Simon Russell-Beale, CBE, born 12th of January 1961, is an English actor. 2 BAFTA Awards, British Academy of Film and Television, 3 Olivier Awards, and similarly to Al Pacino from last week, he has a Tony Award to his name. He was knighted by the Queen Elizabeth II in 2019. He's proper. He started with the Royal Shakespeare Company in 1992. And then in the script, Steve, I've left for you a little list of all of the films that he's been in that have built his career, all of which I've accidentally managed not to see. I kind of brilliantly, I've avoided every single one. So I'm very new to Simon Russell-Beale. What's your take on him?
Well, it's quite the list here. I mean, you've got here Orlando 92, Hamlet in 96, The Deep Blue Sea 2011, Mary Queen of Scots 2018, The Benediction 2021, The Outfit 2022. Of course, he may be more widely known for playing Beria in The Death of Stalin, Armando Iannucci's film of the time in Russia, which he was amazing in that. And he just fits Armando Iannucci's kind of style, I actually saw him as a kid when he came to my hometown when the RSCs came to Braintree Leisure Centre to do Richard III, and he was Richard III, and he was absolutely... This is before 92. This is probably 89 or something like that, but amazing in that as well. But he's just got such a fantastic voice, fantastic delivery. It's perfect for this kind of book.
Yeah, let's get this thing out of the way first. I think both you and I agree we have a magical threshold on this program, which goes from is the person narrating the novel or are they performing it? I think without question he is performing. Is that correct, Steve? You're not going to argue with that, I don't think.
No, definitely before. I think every week, actually, I should bring in a bell like they do on Call My Bluff with sort of Robert Robinson Bell. Once we've both agreed it's a performance. Ding. There you go.
It's upper level. Of course, 2009 to 2010, for those familiar with the canon, Russell-Beale played George Smiley in the BBC Radio 4 adaptation of the John le Carré novels. So he's got form. So in that way, he's a great choice as well. It's interesting. I think the performance he gives, having listened to that, bathed in that minute and a half of the description of the bad aunts, I think is perfect. It feels of the time, doesn't it, Steve?
Very much so. Very much of the time. No, definitely. It's
the Royal Shakespeare Company will do that for you, I guess. Although the interesting thing, of course, is he was born in 1961, as mentioned, which is he'd have been 2 years old when the events of this book happened. But I just think his character portrayals are brilliant. His kind of jaded, posh, tired. I think all the spies were tired, and he kind of brings a really good level of fatigue to the role. I don't know if that makes sense.
He does completely. And this is, again, you can understand why he was cast by Amanda Iannucci for Beria in Death of Stalin. It's the same kind of thing, really. I mean, it was much more fast paced. It was much more in the style of the thick of it and so on. But the kind of the attitude, it's all in the attitude. And for this book, yes, you know what? This is the perfect the book, the dialogue in the book, the words in the book, the performance by Simon Russell-Beale does take me back to the 1980s Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and those long pauses, those long scenes in the grainy film footage of Tinker Tailor, which was kind of synonymous with that kind of storytelling at the time. And it was wondering when Gary Oldman made the movie in 2011 or something like that, much later on, of course, most recent adaptation of Tinker Tailor for the screen. How are you gonna basically pull 6 hours, 8 hours of television into one film, but still get those long, bleak sort of pauses and scenes in there? But he pulled it off.
Yeah, there is an argument that I certainly, before I read this book, I was going, I just don't need the long pauses. Just got to get on with it. When's the car chase? But I have to say, having immersed
George Smiley just slid across the bonnet of a Morris Marina, and I don't know if that was the 1960s, and then just sped off in a car chase, shouting "Gov" a lot when he was for controllers trying to rein him in. So don't call me Gov, I'm Control.
But that's not what this is. I mean, I appreciate that lots of people have an emotional attachment, a long-standing half a century's worth of emotional attachment to the material. But actually, to enter it cold with only sort of the background hum. I didn't even remember. I watched The Night Manager with Hugh Laurie, second mention on this show, and Tom Hiddleston. I didn't even remember that was a le Carré book. I'd seen Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and again, it's one of those names that but it was always sort of background to me. And I have to say, so this is my first le Carré novel, and I enjoyed being transported back to near history that I can almost remember and relate to. There's stuff here. So he goes at one point to a photo. He goes to the Happy Snaps on West End Lane. I know exactly where that is, in West Hampstead in London. There is a community of Eastern European people in Kilburn in northwest London. So which is where somebody I know lives, who I see quite regularly. So I know, I'm walking down the same streets that this is happening in a previous version when the books are in London. I can certainly relate to them. I like the period, and I like I'm fascinated by Eastern Europe. So yeah, no, I really enjoyed this book, even though I don't have the emotional attachment that anybody else has. I now want to go and watch the Alec Guinness.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. You won't be disappointed, and I enjoyed this one too. It's one of those books again for me. I have to really, really concentrate. If you miss something, you really miss something. That's the only thing I'd say. A couple of comments on Audible have come in since the release of the book. As you can imagine, they're all pretty much 5 stars. Pure le Carré, says Andy Evans. It's 5 stars. Will be an absolute feast for a fan of the master. Hats off to Nick Harkaway. I look forward to hearing more from George Smiley. Masquerade again on Audible says, I found the story okay, but was amused to see most, if not all, characters from the originals mentioned. The reading was poor, he says, as there seemed little or no difference between the characters. But most other people just saying, masterly performance by Simon Russell-Beale, a living, breathing Smiley, top notch.
I have to say that I have to confess I did vague out some of it. Particularly people's internal monologues and Smiley solving problems in that way he did in that clip. You can't see this, but I can, and this is how it all works, and predicting stuff. I have to say I switched off for bits of those. But of course, doing this, in order to harvest those clips, I listened to the book a second time. And when you know how it ends, actually, it all makes sense the second time you listen to it.
Yes.
But yeah, it's a little chewy in places, but at the same time, to passively consume it as an audiobook, that doesn't matter. You can tell when you've got 3 minutes to do the hoovering. You can feel it coming.
It feels super relevant because things are so bleak at the moment. And do you know what? I think we need a comfort blanket, which we can maybe move on to now, what we're doing next week, Matt.
Oh, yes.
But we'll just do the stats on Karla's Choice, a John le Carré novel by Nick Harkaway. And John le Carré, Simon Russell-Beale, the narrator, 10 hours and 42 minutes. Penguin Audio is the publisher, and it was released towards the end of October on the 24th, so it's still relatively fresh. Next time, here comes the comfort blanket. This time next year, A Life of Positive Thinking by the nation's treasure, David Jason. And it's completely narrated by David Jason as well, 8 hours and 40 minutes. It's the unabridged audiobook. You might have seen him on the interviews. He's been doing the press rounds and everything. I did read his first book, which wasn't read by him, which was a shame. I think he did the prologue, but he handed over. But it was a lot of. It was just so nice. So it'd be nice to sort of hear a bit of David Jason.
Yeah, I've heard a clip of it. As I say, it got spewed up by the algorithm for me to have a listen to a 5-minute clip last week, and I was immediately engaged. He's put some effort into the writing, and then he brings it to life as you would expect, with his engaging personality. He's put the effort in, is what I'm saying, and I'm looking forward to consuming it in full.
Absolutely. Yep. Looking forward to that. We want to know what you think of it as well. That is this time next year, A Life of Positive Thinking by David Jason. We're going to be reviewing that one next week. You can get in touch with us via Audiobook Show on Instagram. By the way, a bot update for you, Matt. It looks like the bots are receding now. We hit a peak of 1,300 followers. They're now starting. I think Instagram's just finding out how fake these people are. And the total is slowly receding down to... Good.
End it on a high, Steve.
Yeah, so we join our
join the ever-dwindling number of automated spam bots who follow us on Instagram using that hashtag audiobook club. Is that what you're saying?
Join the conversation with our spam bots who are now even they're leaving, and they don't even really exist. Although we did have a couple of comments on which I can't really understand from the spam bots. One was simply just said the word Abuna Bolling, which I didn't quite to Miranda Hart's book a few weeks ago. And
I'm not touching that.
Abuna Bolling back to you, mate. Frankly, well, that probably means something very offensive. I don't know. Anyway, I'll row back on that if you can edit one out. That'll be very appreciative. Anyway, we shall see you next week. Take good care of yourselves.